And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 8 of season 3, you know the deal. I got to talk to you, the people, about a few quick things. First off, if you are new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. We have a lot of fun episodes coming in the near future. So I want to make sure you guys like and subscribe so you can be here for the long journey of these next couple episodes. We have some fun ones in store. I'm very, very excited. Also, if you happen to like our podcast and want to share it with other people, hit that arrow button right below this video. You can share us to Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and all of the above. So please do that in order to help grow our podcast. It takes just as much as our effort and yours to grow this podcast so we can be a big part of the Pistons community as we see in the future. Let's get into episode number 8 of season 3. So first off, Ryan, as a Detroit Pistons fan, we are in a great space, great mindset in the Pistons community with the Pistons team. As we're recording, the Pistons are currently on a 4-game win streak, have won 6 out of the last 7 games, and will be playing the Brooklyn Nets very soon here. And right now, the Pistons are just in a great space. Cade Cunningham, pretty much undeniable all-star, playing at an all-time level right now. And there's some downsides, and that's what we're going to get into today's episode is with Jaden Ivey and breaking his fibula. But Ryan, as far as where the Pistons are at right now is at an all-time confidence level with a Malik Beasley. Where's your head at, and how are you feeling with this great success that we've been long waiting for?
I mean, hey, sitting at 500 right now, I'm granted 18 losses is not great, but sitting at 500 for the first time in a while has to feel good. That has to feel good. Obviously, you had the Portland Trail Blazers the other night, and we pull that one out by 3.
Yep.
But like that game is a key example of what we're going to be talking about today a little bit, with the absence of Jaden Ivey, of course. But like, I'm happy right now. I was telling one of my buddies today, I'm like, hey, we're 500. It's been a while. And he's like, yeah, it really has been. What, since like the 80s? I'm like, technically, yes. But I mean, I wasn't going to go there because he was being a little dissed there. But I'm like, I'm going to let it slide. I'm going to let it slide. But yeah, it feels great for the Pistons to be in this spot. Obviously, season is nowhere near being close to done. There's still a lot of work that this group needs to go and do and put the work in. But I'm happy sitting at 18 right now, 500 for the first time in a while.
Yeah, and I have some friends I work with that in the early 2000s were major Detroit Pistons fans and just like diehards, and then over the past 20 years just have given up on the Pistons basically. And I'm talking to them in sales meetings and stuff being like, you guys got to tune in to these Pistons games because they are very entertaining. And here at work, you know, we sell ads in Detroit Pistons broadcast. So I'm like, you got to start selling ads because people are tuning in a big way. So I'm basically telling everybody, hey, look at what the Detroit Pistons are doing right now. And more specifically, Cade Cunningham. And Ryan, a big part of the Detroit Pistons early success was Jaden Ivey. And unfortunately, in the last week, January 1st, we saw Jaden Ivey break his fibula, and it's just a really big loss for the Detroit Pistons because we know Jaden Ivey is a big kind of vocal spokesperson for the Detroit Pistons, whether it's following game plan to the T or getting buckets in times that we need them, or being a voice of motivation for those that maybe going through a lot of different emotions through their first season, like a Ron Holland and a young, NBA player like an Asar Thompson. Even though Jaden Ivey is just starting his NBA career, he is a voice of reason for a lot of players. So Jaden Ivey underwent surgery for his broken fibula last Thursday morning, and Ivey will be reevaluated in around 4 weeks after his surgery. And the Pistons are leaving the door open for a return before the regular season concludes on April 13th. Theoretically, Jaden Ivey would be in his best shape for a first playoff series. Maybe we would even see him sit through the rest of the regular season. And if the Detroit Pistons are in the playoffs, then he makes his return, probably coming off the bench for the first couple of games, let him get used to this energy. But Ryan, as far as like strategy for preparing for the playoffs, bringing in Jaden Ivey for a fresh start in a playoff series with lots of energy, ready to be back, may be a great situation for the Pistons as players are getting tired and Jaden Ivey will be ready to get back at it.
Yeah, that would be a win-win situation for us, just looking at it as a bigger picture. Because right
Yeah.
now, where we're sitting at in the standings, we're not in a bad situation at all. In fact, the last time I checked, more recently it would have been we would be in the play-in. But right now, where we're sitting, I believe we're actually at the eighth seed.
Yeah.
So out of the play-in, in the playoffs for sure. If the season ended right now, we'd be in the playoffs, which is phenomenal. But that being said, no matter what in those situations, whether or not we're the eighth seed or a play-in team, getting Jaden Ivey back into the groove of things, obviously it's going to be a little rough because it's he wouldn't have been playing competitive games or just in that nature in a decent amount of time because he's going to be out for a decent amount of time here with this injury and then even post-surgery now. So he's going to have to get his legs underneath himself, pun intended a little bit, but no, he's gonna have to get into the groove of things again to really make an impact because where we're at right now, usually okay. So if you look back, like Asar Thompson as an example, missed the last 20 games of last season with blood clots, misses summer league, misses training camp, comes in,
Yeah.
and we're like, ooh, this is kind of a little rough with Asar. Like this isn't like what we saw last year, even. This isn't like anything woo. It was a little shaky here and there. But then as he's gotten more and more time under himself, he's looking like obviously not a stud, but he is looking very, very good out there on any given night. So I think that's needless to say, that's what's going to happen with Jaden Ivey if we were to be in the playoffs and have a situation where he's coming back. He's going to need to get a couple reps here and there. Maybe he's coming off the bench at that point in time, and he's only getting like 10 minutes or so, or whatever it may look like. I don't see him going like all gang ho, starting lineup, 20 plus minutes right away. I don't see that. But it would be a win-win situation for us if we were to get that, because where we're at right now with our team, we've won 3 games in a row without Jaden Ivey on the court post or the Orlando Magic game, which we did win. But in those 3 games, Charlotte, we won 98-94. That's not a lot. That's not a lot of room for error. Then we had Minnesota, which Anthony Edwards is out of this world, and we hold on for dear life and pull that one out. But we win.
Yeah.
We win by a couple points there, and then we had Portland the other night, and we won by 3. So like, it's starting to become a little bit more difficult now. The best case scenario with what's happened in the situation we're in is that we've played multiple back-to-backs in a row, whereas these guys are just tired, and that's why these games are a little bit closer than what they typically would be. So that's the bright spot. But yeah, so when Jaden Ivey, if he does come back and we're in the playoffs, I'm not expecting him to be starting initially. I'm going to expect at least ballpark 8 to 10 minutes. That's about it until he really gets back into the groove of things. Because otherwise, there's just no way that like anybody coming off of an injury is going to be like, boom, all ready to go right away. So that's what I would expect. But who really knows?
So just to get a full image of what the Eastern Conference standings are looking like before we start to talk about Jaden Ivey's injury and who that affects the most. Right now, the Detroit Pistons are tied for seventh in the Eastern Conference with the Atlanta Hawks at 18 and 18, 500. But here's the thing where the Eastern Conference standings gets very interesting. So right now in the fifth spot, the Milwaukee Bucks are at 18 and 16. And at the sixth spot, the Indiana Pacers 19 and 18. So the Pistons are about to go into an easy stretch of games compared to their Western Conference stint against all the juggernauts in the West just a week ago. And so the Detroit Pistons have a real shot at jumping up the standings to possibly the fifth standing. But here's the thing with the bottom end of the standings 10 through 9 is 17 and 17 with the Miami Heat, Chicago Bulls right below the Miami Heat at 10 with 17 and 19, right below the Detroit Pistons and the Atlanta Hawks, who are tied. So if the Detroit Pistons find themselves slipping through some of this easy games in these next 5 games, the Pistons may be looking on the outside. They either have to play very good and make a jump for the fifth spot, which would be absolutely great because it would give them a little bit more of assurance. If they drop a couple games, then they know they're still in the playoff hunt. But it would be really nice and secure spot if they were looking at the 5, because I mean, no better position than top 5 in as far as playoffs we're talking about. That would just be absolutely great. And then when you look at the playoffs as a whole, when the playoffs started, if they're at the 5th seed, the 5 and 6 always start in the first round typically. So that would be a pretty awesome situation rather than going against, the Cavs or the Celtics. We're looking at Indiana Pacers, Milwaukee Bucks, Atlanta Hawks. Those are kind of teams we're talking about that would possibly be around the 5th and 6th mark with the Eastern Conference rankings. Ryan, when talking about Jaden Ivey and him missing and who that affects the most, it probably gives a great opportunity to Ron Holland. And that's what we've been seeing in the absence of Jaden Ivey. He had his best game of the season just 5 days prior after Jaden Ivey's injury, and just playing at a high level, and especially against the Timberwolves and the big wins recently. We've seen Jaden Ivey, or Ron Holland rather, just playing in a big way and getting up and down the court. And what role Jaden Ivey kind of had, it's given Ron Holland an ability to kind of fill that role and kind of find where he fits at with this Detroit Pistons rotation.
Yeah, he's played decently well. Obviously, the other night against Portland, it wasn't like his best game out there. Defensively, it was a very good game. Offensively, it's slowly but surely getting there for him. He's still not the best in his decision making at times, but obviously he's 18, 19 years old. He still has a lot of time to develop this. In fact, the way he has his minutes set out to himself right now, like he's 7-8 off the bench right now. Definitely not the 6th man, but he is 7 or 8 right now off the bench for the Pistons. And he's in a good situation because you not only get to see, okay, a smart player like Tobias Harris out there who knows the game inside and out, can make sound decisions. Maybe if he makes a mistake, he always holds himself accountable. But then you even have Malik Beasley, who's coming off the bench at 6, but he's going to change here and there just because of what JB sees inside and out on a day and night. But needless to say, he's in a great situation where he has veterans in front of him, where he can learn all that, just all the things he needs to learn. But then he's also in a position where he goes in, he's the energy guy. You know what to get out of him. You know what to expect. And maybe he's going to shock you. Maybe he's going to go off for 20 or so points like he did the other night. Or maybe he's just going to have a very, very defensively sound game where you're not scoring on him. And maybe he's not scoring, but you're not scoring at him at all. And that takes away one of the best players because he's always guarding one of the best players on the opposing team. He's never like just guarding some random player that not some random player per se, because nobody's random, but some random player given what another opposing team could bring on a daily basis. And he's usually guarding the best one out there. And that speaks volumes to how good of a defender he is. But then it also shows you like how much trust JB has in him, how good he's actually gotten since coming into the league. And he's excelled since Ivy's been out. And obviously, like I said, he's not maybe excelled in points, but that's not what we've always expected out of Ron Holland. We've expected him to do great things defensively first. We haven't expected great things offensively first. Offense will come. Offense will always come. But defense wins championships. That is the bread and butter of Detroit basketball right there, is defense. So if we can get Ron Holland in more of a defensive mode like we have gotten out of him, the 20 points, great. But needless to say, the defense is what's been propelling him to be in this role, in this position that he's in. Because if you take away that defense, I really see him as like 8, 9, 10 off the bench. And usually you don't play 10 guys in the NBA. It's usually you're playing either 6 or you're playing 8, and that's about it. So once you get towards 8 and below, you're in a position where you're like Paul Reed. Paul Reed is actually a very good big man in the NBA. Obviously, he's not an all-star or anything to that caliber, but he's still a good player that you could put in and plug in at any point in time, and he's going to do good things. But in terms of the rotation, compared to the other guys, like he's not like blowing everyone out of proportions or out of the water per se. Whereas Ron Holland has put himself in a position because of his opportunities that he's been granted in the past, that now Ivy goes down. JB's going like, okay, I need some speed out there. I need a guy who can not only defend, but make the smart pass from time to time, who can look for his shot. And maybe his shot's not falling. He can kick it out, or maybe he can slash and get to the rim. That's exactly what Jaden Ivey was doing before the injury, is he was like the quick, I'm going to slash in the paint and take it to the rim, or I'm going to look for the kick out, or he's just the plug and play guy that we wanted to have with this team. Ron Holland, because of his abilities that slightly mimic Jaden Ivey, he's been put into this position and given this opportunity to go like, okay, show me what you can do. And I think he's doing a decent job. Obviously, from an offensive standpoint, 8 points, not great like the other night, but defensively, he is doing great things.
Well, and something that makes this Jaden Ivey injury hurt that much more is we talked about in seasons prior that Cade and Jaden didn't have a good on-court relationship as far as setting each other up, pushing the pace of the game. And they finally figured it out this season in the first nearly 40 games, and they figured it out in a big way. It just, when the season gets ended early, it's just so unfortunate because we finally saw Cade Cunningham bringing up the ball, Jaden setting a screen, and then going out to the 3-point line, Cade dishing it to him and knocking it down. Or, Cade finding Jaden Ivey in transition, getting the ball up the court, Jaden laying it in. We saw these different scenarios that we hadn't seen, the prior 2 seasons that Jaden Ivey was on the Detroit Pistons. And, it just stinks when you see a chemistry forming, but it has to be cut short during the season because of an injury. I kind of want to talk about some quotes from Jaden Ivey's injury. First off, going to talk about what Jaden Ivey had to say, I believe, on Twitter. Says, so encouraged by the amount of thoughts, messages, and prayers I've received. I'm thankful for my wife and my whole family who have been with me throughout the start of this. Ivey wrote, even in the midst of this, I trust the one who has put me in this spot. And I know my Father will get me through because he is faithful and a great God. I hope this situation can inspire anybody going through any trial in life, and that Jesus loves you and he won't just leave you where you are or leave you stuck, but lean on your Father because he is right there through your trial. So Jaden Ivey obviously seeming in a great mental state. Sometimes when players get injured, they can go off the rocker at times. So it's great to see that Jaden Ivey has a great outlook and staying close to his family and God. And Jaden Ivey, when he got injured, was averaging 18 points per game, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and basically the best season of his career and just playing out of his mind. And unfortunately gets injured. JB Bickerstaff also had a quote after Jaden Ivey's injury. He talked to FanDuel Sports Network and said, quote, "It's tough on the whole group to see him hurting like that. It is tough on us. He's built for it. He's going to shake back knowing him. He's going to work his tail off and be better than even when he gets back. It's tough for sure." And end quote. So JB Bickerstaff obviously a little upset with with gonna eventually miss Jaden Ivey with the Detroit Pistons. Probably not the type of quote maybe we got from Monty Williams. Throwback to their little distaste for each other. And it's just such a brutal injury. You know, you hear a fibula and you're like, oh my gosh, you just kind of groan a little bit because you're like, oh, this isn't going to go well. This surgery is pretty brutal. But it's at least good to see that the Pistons are almost rallying too after his injury, having 3 games in a row where they're pretty much beating teams pretty good. Ryan, what are some of your thoughts on the Detroit Pistons missing Jaden Ivey in a big way?
So right now we're in the period of seeing how smart Trajan Langdon and JB Biggerstaff really are.
Totally.
Because when they went out to build this roster for this upcoming season, they went out, they got Tim Hardaway Jr. They went out, got Malik Beasley. They went out and got Tobias Harris. And then throw Wendell Moore in there. Wendell Moore hasn't had that significant of a role. And then throw Paul Reed in there. Neither of them have, but they have gotten decent minutes from time to time. But needless to say, the 3 guys in particular that I listed off prior to Paul Reed and Wendell Moore, those 3 guys are proving how smart and capable JB Bickerstaff and Trajan Langdon are in building and putting together a roster and a lineup at any given night. And that's 3 in a row. The most impressive being against Minnesota, where we won 119-105, because Anthony Edwards broke the record for the most points scored by an opposing team's player in Little Caesars Arena at 53 points. And that's the crazy thing to me, is the fact that Anthony Edwards in Detroit drops 53 points and we still find a way to win. And that proves to you how good Langdon and Bickerstaff are in seeing talent, developing talent, and throwing together a lineup against some of the league's best. Because Anthony Edwards could have been he could have probably done more than even the 53. But we were able to stop him when it mattered the most. But in that situation without Jaden Ivey, which puts a damper, because like we said last year, we weren't getting Batman out of Cade, we were getting Robin. And what is he? This year, we're getting Batman out of Cade. We're getting more than just Batman out of Cade. But we were missing, like, if you look at last year, if we're having that debate on if Cade is Batman or Robin, then who's Robin to his Batman if he is Batman? And we've figured that out to be Jaden Ivey this year. And then Ivy goes down, and then now you're looking for Alfred. Who's Alfred? And you're going down the list, and you're like, okay, it could be Tobias Harris. He has veteran experience. He's been in the league for a hot second. He's never averaged below 15 points in his career, and he's been in the league for, 12 years now, which is absurd. Or you have Tim Hardaway Jr., which last year with the Mavericks kind of lost his groove, wasn't scoring 20-plus points like he had been prior. And everybody's going like, oh, Tim Hardaway Jr., there's not much there to work with anymore. Or you have Malik Beasley, who prior to this season, he was a starter with the Bucks, but not like the go-to guy, because obviously you have Giannis, and then you have Damian Lillard, and you have Brook Lopez, and the whole gang is there and present. So all these 3 guys, you're kind of like in their situations last year, you're kind of looking at it this year going like, yeah, they're going to be solid role players on this team. They're not going to be anything spectacular for us. Nobody was expecting them to come in the way they have. But in that game in particular, like not just Minnesota, but the other night against the Trailblazers, you had Tim Hardaway Jr. go off for 26 points. And that's not like crazy, but it is considering the fact that the night prior against Minnesota, he only put up 7 points. And you go, okay, Cade's going to get you his 30 points. But who's going to step up after Cade isn't there? Because now we don't have Ivy. So who's going to be the next man up? And those three guys, and now I will say Malik Beasley didn't have the greatest shooting night ever against Portland, 1 of 10 from the field, not good at all. But he still made up for it. He was still working his tail off on the defensive side of the ball, which is great. But then Tobias, 17 points, phenomenal. Tim Hardaway Jr., 26 points, great. And then Jalen Duren even had a very quiet 14. But needless to say, everybody since that injury has been stepping up and playing at a whole new level. Like you look back at the game the other night, Tim Hardaway Jr. got a push off of him. Anthony Simons went down, pushed him off, hit the three, and you're sitting there going like, ooh, this might go downhill now. And then how does Tim Hardaway Jr. respond? He jumps back up, you go down in transition, he hits a three. And you're like, okay, he just responded great. Like, what's going on right now? So needless to say, we're seeing the mastermind process behind JB Bickerstaff, Luke Walton, Jarrett Jack, the whole coaching staff. And then you're seeing, okay, Trajan Langdon actually knows a thing or two about basketball. And that's been the biggest bright spot of Jaden Ivey going down is we're recognizing and finding out what guys are capable of when prior to that, we weren't getting as much just because Ivy was just putting on a show.
Somebody you mentioned that I think is trying to take more shots and be more responsible on the offensive end is Tim Hardaway Jr. Said he had 26 against the Portland Trail Blazers. It was noticeable against Portland in particular that Tim Hardaway was trying to assert himself in the offense, and he did it in a big way that game specifically. And I think that's what we're going to continue to need to see from him in order to try to fill the offensive load of Jaden Ivey, not necessarily that role of getting out and running, but fill that role of the points we're going to be missing. He was averaging 17 points. That's not just little amount. That's not 8 points. That's a big amount of points that we need to fill in now from those games because we can't have cold spots. And I think Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to be a big part of help filling that role. I have one more quote from JB Bickerstaff after the Jaden Ivey injury. He talks about previously to this quote how with the absence of Jaden Ivey, they're going to lean on Wendell Moore Jr. You mentioned Desar Thompson and Malik Beasley as far as scoring load. He goes on to say, quote, "We don't expect one person to fill the gap for JI," Bickerstaff said. "It's going to take everybody to do a little bit more of what they do, play to their strength, but they know what JI would want them to do and what he'd want them to go out and compete their tail off and try to win as many games as we can. So that's where the guys are at mentally, and that's what we expect them to do," end quote. So it looks like Trajan Langdon, JB Bickerstaff are preparing accordingly to what they need to do to still succeed without Jaden Ivey, and it's seeming to work pretty well. Ryan, any last final thoughts before we wrap up today's episode?
The absence of Jaden Ivey is going to hurt in particular just because like I mentioned, we don't have a Robin right now. We just have a cast of guys that can step up and fill that role. Malik Beasley the other night, obviously not great. Shooting 1 of 10 is not good. Finished with 5 points. He's going to bounce back off that. He's been a stud all season long. He's not going to just go down the drain and not do anything. So Malik Beasley is going to be fine. And then even Tim Hardaway Jr. maybe not go off for 26 every single night, but he's going to get you a bucket or two. And then as far as Tobias Harris, 17 out of him, I'm taking 17 out of him any night. So those three guys can keep doing what you're doing. We're going to be fine there. Jalen Duren, this is your time to step up because Jaden Ivey's no longer there right now. And I will take those three guys in particular having a good game, but you have not been as dominant this year as you have the last two. So step up, because we're going to need you to continue on this streak that we're on right now.
That will do it for episode number 8 of season 3. Make sure to like and subscribe, and also tune in to next week's episode, as we are going to be taking a deep dive into AI and its bold predictions for the Detroit Pistons in the next 10 years. It's going to get wild. It's going to be a little weird, but make sure to tune in. We will see you guys in next week's episode. Peace.